everyone. My name is Catherine Gould, and I teach field at Campbellsville University. I teach both advanced and foundation field, and I wanted to give you all a chance to have a little bit of a face-to-face instructional video from me regarding your competency papers. I've been teaching field for a while now, and I have noticed a trend in what students do to prevent them from scoring higher than they could on their competency papers. And there's a couple pitfalls that students seem to fall into, and so we're going to go over those all today. And so I apologize about my notes, but I'm not really tech savvy enough to figure out how to pull up a PowerPoint and do a recording at the same time. Hopefully I'll be able to figure that out one day, but for now we're just going to go with the old school notes, if you will. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the way the competency paper is structured. The first thing that you should do with your competency paper, of course, is to write your cover page. And just remember that now we have adapted to the 7th version of APA. So we're no longer using 6. So take a minute before we start writing these competency papers this semester to see the difference between APA from version 6 to now how APA is done in version 7, because you will be graded on version 7 moving forward in all your coursework. So after you take a minute to look at that, do your cover page and just notice the differences. Like, I believe now that there's not a running head on every page, so that's one difference that you'll have in your paper from maybe last semester to this semester. So take a minute, look at your APA, do your cover page, and then move into sectioning your paper. Doing titles is what I recommend doing initially, so that way you don't miss any of the key components of the paper and lose points unnecessarily. So start with your competency, title your competency, put that in the middle of the page, and then go through and then write practice behavior. So for example, if you're writing the first paper on competencies, do practice behavior A1.1, and then continue until make sure you've got all your practice behaviors identified with headings, and then do subheadings for your tasks. Label them task 1, task 2, task 3. It should look something, again, this is my notes version, something like this. So you have your competency, your practice behavior. Let's see if I can figure out how to get this on the screen. Task 1, task 2, and task 3, and then repeat it until you make sure you have all the practice behaviors included. And again, you won't have a generic title of practice behavior. You'll have a more identifying title of what that practice behavior is, so we know which one you're talking about. But you can do a generic title of task 1, task 2, and task 3, and repeat that through until you get all of the tasks identified as well as all the practice behaviors. And if you pay attention to your rubric, you only have to identify 3 tasks. If you identify less than 3 tasks and talk about less than 3 tasks, then you lose points. So that's why I suggest go ahead and titling it as you write it and then going back in and filling it in. Another thing that I strongly suggest students do is when you have supervision, try to think about, okay, I've got competency paper 1 coming up. So I'm going to discuss with my supervisor competency 1 and the practice behaviors underneath of it so I can kind of have that fresh in my head about what practice behaviors I've accomplished so far. So if you, for example, as you move along in the semester, you may do some of these tasks earlier in the semester and forget about them. So it's really good to go back and talk to your supervisor and have a conversation in supervision so you can identify, okay, this is the task that I've already done. And that's what let's talk about it a little bit and write it down. So that would be the best way to outline your paper. And again, talk about it in supervision so it's fresh in your mind, and you could really just knock that paper out by already having the ideas for your tasks and what you're going to write about. So another pitfall that everybody seems to forget about is writing about their competency. Or they'll take the competency and word it actually word for word from what's written on the learning contract, which is where you find your competencies and your practice behaviors and tasks underneath. So if you think about the competency, what we want to do is not regurgitate it word for word. We want to talk about why we are doing this practice, or why we're doing this competency. So I've made a little chart here. The competency would be the why. Why are we engaging in all these things? So you want to talk about it in kind of in a summary. And to receive full credit, you have to show that you understand knowledge about why this skill is required. So the way that is worded is a high level of knowledge, a clear understanding of how the competency guides best practice in service delivery. So we're not talking about the how or the what for the competency, but the why. Why do we need to know this competency as social workers? Why do we need to include it in our practice? And it could be a paragraph or two where you talk about the competency. It doesn't have to be extremely long, but again, you're not regurgitating what the learning contract says. You're taking that information and expanding upon it and telling why. Why do we need to know about that competency? Why does it guide service delivery? Why is it important for best practice? Why do every social worker, regardless of what field you're going into, what part of social work you're going into, why do we all need to know about this? And then the practice behaviors are more of the how. How do the practice behaviors guide the why? So you're breaking it out as to how. How do these practice behaviors guide the why? And then what? Your tasks are the what. So what did you do to meet the qualifications for the practice behaviors? And the practice behaviors are broken out in your task for you. You don't have to do that work. You're just going to take the task and say what you did to accomplish that task. So the tasks are really the what of all of this. So again, if you think about it, sometimes I describe this as if you've ever written a treatment plan. The how, the why rather, or the competency would be the overarching goal that we're trying to achieve. So if you're working with someone who's substance addicted, you might think, okay, sobriety is our overall why. Why are we doing this work? We want to get this client to move towards sobriety. How? How are we going to do it? We're going to write our goals out. So it's the same way with practice behaviors. Practice behaviors can be equated to goals. Goals are how we're going to achieve this overall why of why we're doing this work. And then the what would be your objectives for your goals. So what are we doing? How do we know that we have achieved this practice behavior or this how? Okay, so that's kind of another way to think about this. So make sure you include the why, which is the competency, because if you don't include that, then you lose massive points. Just simply referencing the competency or rewriting it, regurgitating it how it's written in the learning contract is not going to get you high on the rubric. Showing that you understand knowledge, a clear understanding of how the competency guides best practice and service delivery is what's going to get you that 5 on the competencies part of the rubric. The other things that you need to remember when you write your competency paper is to make sure you have good writing, that you have no spelling or grammar mistakes, that you follow your APA format to a T, and that's going to prevent you from losing points unnecessarily for not following APA format. Make sure your paper is the correct length. So to receive a 5, you have to have at least 4 pages, and that doesn't include your cover page or your reference page. That is 4 pages of written work, and that needs to be full pages. If you do 3.5, then that's going to get you the score for 3.5. And no matter if you've done these other things, it's going to automatically knock you down on the rubric. Then again, make sure you include that competency, because if you don't have that section on your competency, you're automatically going to go down to a 0 for that scoring section of the rubric. And even if your paper is extremely well written, you've followed every other guideline, you're just going to score a 10 if you leave that competency out. And that's a pitfall that so many students seem to be falling into. And then after you get done with that part, make sure you do have all your practice behaviors identified, every single one of them, and 3 tasks under each practice behavior. Because if you don't have 3 tasks, then that's going to reduce your score unnecessarily on the rubric. So again, if you go back to what I suggested here, make sure you outline first, and that's going to make sure you outline first, and that's going to make sure that you have every single practice behavior, every single task, and your competency fulfilled, and that should get you where you need to be on your score. So always, if you have any questions and you're in my class, feel free to reach out to me. If you're in a different course section and somebody else has shared this video, make sure you reach out to your professor, and they can help you understand even further and answer any questions that you may have. So thanks so much for your time, and again, we can get through this. We'll make it sure that we get all of your competency papers done in a way that gets you higher scoring on the rubric, but make sure you reach out to us and ask questions and read your feedback, because we'll always give you feedback on what you need to do to improve your score and the things that you've done well. So thank you guys so much, and I can't wait to read all of your papers in class.